We all know that mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell, but in a power outage, cells and entire organs can die off. Could a carefully designed molecule be able to keep the lights on? At the end of this video, you will understand why mitochondria fail, how a special class of drugs could prevent that, and why one single magic nitrogen atom makes all the difference. In some sense, this video was sponsored by this random supporter. They bought my new book, The Freshman Mole, but it was so good that they couldn't stop at just one copy. Apparently $2.99 minus payment processing fees is all you need to influence this channel's content strategy. So here we are with a medicinal chemistry video. If you're a reader yourself, feel free to check out the book preview on my website to see if you might like it as well. So let's start with the biological context, which will hopefully ring a bell for many of you. Mitochondria are cell organelles with a distinct double membrane structure. Inside the inner membrane sits the cell's energy-producing machinery, a series of proteins called the electron transport chain. Food, so carbohydrates, fats and amino acids, are broken down through the Krebs cycle, the ultimate enemy of every student who hates memorization, me included. The energy of these molecules is captured in the form of reducing equivalents, so molecules like NADH and FADH2. The entire purpose of this is to push protons from the mitochondrial matrix into the intermembrane space, creating a concentration gradient of roughly 1 pH unit or tenfold. These protons are very eager to flow back from high to low concentration, but we have a tight membrane in place which is generally impermeable and prevents spontaneous flow. The flow is instead highly controlled and coupled to the activity of a protein which makes ATP, the universal energy currency of the cell. So basically we're investing energy to separate protons into high and low concentrations and then using that energy potential to regenerate ATP. In healthy conditions, the electron transport chain's activity is tightly coupled to the synthase, meaning that most of the energy captured is also used to make ATP. However, that gradient is not bulletproof. The key example is DNP, a molecule you might have heard of if you're into bodybuilding. You can imagine this as the devilish 1930s version of GLP-1 obesity drugs. It doesn't just get you ripped, but can also cause heat death, blindness and other complications. We of course only discovered this after apparently over 100,000 people were treated with DNP in just 1934 alone. So why is it so devilish? It's a mitochondrial decoupler that causes protons to leak across the membrane, so all the chemical energy from food isn't used for ATP synthesis but just lost as heat. This is an example of a drug having a bad effect on the integrity of the mitochondrial membrane. We'll see over the next minutes that the hope is that some drugs do the opposite of DNP and instead lead to a positive effect. To understand this, we need to know that there is a mitochondrial pore called the mPTP. Usually it opens up in response to calcium ion signaling to let through other ions and also larger molecules, but only for a very short time. Most of the time it's closed. The issue is that under high stress conditions like sudden loss and gain of blood flow due to heart issue, the cell can accumulate reactive oxygen species that damage the membrane. With enough stress, the membrane pore, so our mPTP, is broken up and remains permanently open. This kills our proton gradient and leads to an energy crisis, so it's somewhat similar to DNP. But it gets worse, because not just protons but also other ions, molecules and even small proteins can unnaturally pass through. This is a vicious cycle because the leak produces more reactive oxygen species, amplifying the disruption. Eventually, the cell just decides to end its misery and triggers programmed cell death. The pore is a huge multi-protein complex, but one of its key regulators is the enzyme Cyclophilin D. You can see it sitting on top of the channel here. Very simply, if Cyclophilin D is active, the pore is more likely to open up. And if Cyclophilin D is less active, the pore is more likely to be resistant to signaling to open. The amazing thing is that cyclophilin enzymes simply change the conformation of peptide bonds between the amino acids glycine and proline. This reaction is usually very slow, so it's a nice molecular switch for enzyme catalysis. A simple cis-trans interconversion can trigger massive changes in overall conformation, so just a few different twists make the difference of our mitochondrial pore having a closed or open conformation. I'll open a quick tangent for just a minute. If you're into enzymes, you should check out this paper on the specific electrostatic mechanism of how cyclophilins achieve this isomerization. Basically, charged amino acids in the enzyme create an electrostatic field that acts on the dipole of the adjacent carbonyl group. Through some biophysical magic, this stabilizes the transition state of the isomerization reaction energetically. It becomes easier for the peptide bond to rotate out of its plane. A lower transition state means a faster rate, so the reaction is sped up by more than 10,000-fold. By the way, the scientists who first proposed this model also looked at substrates where the carbonyl oxygen is swapped out for sulfur. This reduces the dipole of the group, meaning it experiences much lower stabilization from the enzyme's electrostatic field. This is why the thioamide proline isomerizes much more slowly. Again, feel free to read about this in detail yourself. So we now know that cyclophilin D is an isomerase enzyme which tends to keep the mitochondrial pore open. In a therapeutic context, we want to block cyclophilin D because we've earlier said that the low activity makes the pore more resistant, avoiding that vicious cycle and cell death under high stress conditions. This is why scientists have been trying to find inhibitors of cyclophilin D. There is a natural inhibitor, the peptide cyclosporine. This molecule was first isolated from a fungus 50 years ago, and beyond blocking cyclophilin D and other members of the broader cyclophilin family, it also suppresses the body's immune system. This makes it a useful medicine to minimize organ transplant rejection, but shutting down the immune system isn't exactly lovely because it increases the risk of serious infections and other complications. The motivation for medicinal chemists is to design better inhibitors of cyclophilin D, which could be safe treatments for acute and chronic diseases that might benefit from a closure of the mitochondrial pore. This brings us to the main paper of this video. We'll discuss just some parts of it, looking into how the chemists optimized two dimensions, binding affinity and metabolic stability. From prior research, we already knew a few decent binders of cyclophilin D, and you'll see that they have a central urea functional group as well as an aromatic aniline ring on one side. The most potent inhibitors 3A and 4A had a 5-membered pyrrolidine ring on the other side. And this shouldn't be too surprising because our target enzyme isomerizes prolines after all. But what's really interesting is that just one change in the 5-membered ring of 4A made all the difference. The compound 12A with a pyrazolidine ring proved to be a 30-fold better inhibitor of cyclophilin D. The authors called this a magical nitrogen effect. Can you think of why that substitution is so magical? To give you a hint, it has to do with something that we discussed about proline before. The answer lies in the binding mode to cyclophilin D. If you look very closely at the X-ray crystal structure, you'll notice something about the conformation of the binder. So far, we've drawn the inhibitors with the trans-amide bond geometry, and indeed this is usually the thermodynamically favored ground state. However, when bound to the enzyme, the amide actually wants to adopt the slightly less favored cis geometry so that it can maximize contact points with the active site of the enzyme. This means that to get better binders than 4A, we want a molecule that already likes to adopt this cis conformation because it doesn't have to pay the additional energy penalty before it can optimally bind to cyclophilin D. This is the answer to the magic nitrogen effect. The pyrazolidine ring favors the cis conformation in the ground state already. Here you can see the calculated energies comparing it to a simple proline compound. The trans geometry is much less favored now. But why? It's all about electron density. Putting electron pairs, which are negative charges, directly next to each other makes them very unhappy. The cis amide has a lower energy because the carbonyl is a bit further away, so the repulsion is much weaker. So the magical 12A comes already pre-organized in the cis geometry and can directly plug into the active site. Its binding mode is basically identical to 4A, which we saw earlier. Because the molecule is more eager to bind, the less we need to inhibit most of cyclophilin D, and in theory, the better it would be as a drug. The pyrazolidine ring might look a bit strange, but it can be synthesized in the lab very easily. Just add one free diiodopropane to the hydrazine to get 2 substitutions and create the 5-membered ring. The amide bond is made through simple coupling with a Boc-protected glycine, and one half of the molecule is already done. The other half is even easier. Just take the amine with the aniline ring and activate it with carbonyl diimidazole. Note that the electron pair of the amine is more nucleophilic than the aniline nitrogen, given the latter is delocalized into the ring. The product is an activated electrophilic urea, and our other half serves as our nucleophile once we deprotect the Boc amine of the glycine. So 12A is a 30-fold better binder than 4A, but it's still not on the level of cyclosporine, the natural but unfortunately immunosuppressive inhibitor of cyclophilin D. By adding this additional ring to the aniline, an approach already used in prior research as well, they managed to further increase the affinity. Looking at the X-ray structure, we see that this is because the free hydroxyl group engages in additional hydrogen bonding interactions with a water molecule and polar amino acids. But modifying the aniline also improved the metabolic stability of the molecule, the second optimization aspect that we've mentioned initially. A lower clearance means that the drug sticks around longer to do its job before it's eliminated out of the body. Because the aniline was one of the electron-rich sites in the molecule, it makes sense that adding the ring reduces how fast that part of the molecule is oxidized and degraded by metabolic enzymes. You can also see that the solubility improved in the series, which makes total sense looking at the polarity of the free molecules. They played around with other variants of 18A, but we don't need to cover every detail here. The big question is, do these molecules actually help keep the mitochondrial pore shut? To answer this, they ran a calcium retention capacity assay in isolated mitochondria. Put simply, we're sending calcium ion guests to knock on the mitochondrial pore's door and are measuring with fluorescence how many guests are actually being let in. If many calcium ions get through, the party is open door, which is not what we want. If it takes a lot of knocking to get calcium ions through the pore, then it's quite an exclusive party and our pore is resilient towards opening. This is exactly what we see with the pink curve of 18C looking almost as good as our beloved cyclosporine. After 6 pulses, it's game over, but this might be already plenty to have a therapeutic effect. Our cyclophilin D inhibitors does really seem to push the pore towards a closed state, and this effect is, as you would expect, dependent on the concentration. The more inhibitor we add, the less active the cyclophilin D and the less leaky our pore and membrane. The curve you see here is actually for compound 18F, which has this additional biaryl methylmorpholine side chain. It turned out that this one was simply the best from the entire series. So looking at isolated mitochondria suggests some benefits, but does this really help prevent overall cellular damage? This is what the next experiment wanted to clarify. The y-axis counts how many cells initiate their own death after being exposed to the compound TLCS. This is a steroid-like molecule that depolarizes the mitochondrial membrane and activates some bad pathways. The red bar basically shows you what happens when TLCS wreaks havoc without any protection. The black bar is our friend cyclosporine, and you see that it's lower than the red one, so there is some protection against cell death. The gray bars were different compounds from the MedChem series, and promisingly, these seem even better than cyclosporine. Now that we went from mitochondria to the cellular level, the next question is organ level change in live organisms. Here the scientists used Caerulein, a molecule that if dosed enough, creates inflammation of the pancreas in mice. The logic is the same as before when they used TLCS to initiate cell death. If our inhibitors really work, the cells should be overall more resilient towards the bad molecule, and in this case, they should experience lower inflammation and organ damage. This does seem to be the case. Treating mice with compound 18F reduced biomarkers of pancreatitis, so inflammation of the pancreas, and seem to offer some protection to their organ tissues. In the histology, you can see that the bottom right quadrant labeled 4 does not look as horrendous as the untreated top right quadrant labeled 2. Many other markers were measured, but not all of them were reduced significantly, so it's not a home run just yet. However, the data suggests that we really might be able to create therapeutically active cyclophilin D inhibitors which are not immunosuppressive like cyclosporine. I think it's cool that the proton gradient, something so many of us mindlessly learn in school, is connected to disease and also treatments. Also, I just really liked the magic nitrogen pre-organization as well as the electrostatic handle mechanism of proline isomerization. There has been and still is a lot of research into this molecular target, including other isoforms like cyclophilin B and other organs like liver disease. Just one glance at the lead compound in this abstract and you'll notice a few similarities and also differences to the series of molecules that we discussed today. There's definitely more medicinal chemistry out there than you can read. I hope you're now also pre-organized to check out my book and to drop a like on the video. Thanks for watching, and a huge special thanks goes to my channel supporters on YouTube and on Patreon. I hope to see all of you again in the next one.